And so with that, my time is up.
We do have 5 minutes for the Q&A. At first I have a comment, because I loved when you said if you have multi-factor authentication on your VPN, you're still not safe.
Yeah.
I'm happy about that, because I started my career in cybersecurity by actually breaking RSA's MFA when it first came out, and man, were they pissed about it. So it turns out, in fact, that these are very well-known vulnerabilities, that MFA is better than no MFA, but it doesn't solve the problem. I would like to poke a little bit more, though. I was listening very carefully. You posed yourself a question that said, how can I know how far back to go to make sure that I wasn't already infested with ransomware? Mm-hmm. And you kind of danced around it, but can you give us a little bit more of a working answer to that?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that we help customers do is scan through the backups for indicators of compromise over a time series. Mm-hmm. And if you think about any scanning that you do today on a production server, you can only scan now. But if you do it from the perspective of backups, where typically you'll have daily backups going back at least 30 days is our recommendation, that gives you one thing you never had before, a time machine.
Right, so you can look at the delta.
So we can look at the delta between all of them and say, actually, 6 days ago is where we first saw this on this particular server. This one, we've never seen anything from the attacker. It was just encrypted, recovered to yesterday.
Got it. So basically your answer is look for the flags and inspect them, and they'll tell you one way or another. But I'm interested when you talk about 30 days as a time period, because I know some of the ransomware folks have been embedding Easter eggs as far back as 18 months ago. Mm-hmm. So that 30-day scan isn't going to tell you anything. So
you're right, but also it is going to tell you something that you a lot quicker that would be much more painful if you didn't have that ability, in that, let's say you only have 30 days of backups.
Right.
Then what we can tell you is that you do not have a recoverable point in time for this set of servers. That's it. Stop trying to rinse and repeat. Don't try and do 50 recoveries. They're all compromised. So you can immediately say, these servers, we cannot get back from backup because they've been compromised longer than we have recovery points. But everything else that's a victim, we can just recover to yesterday. But you're right. If they've been in there longer than you have history, then we've just given you the quickest answer to being able to determine you can't recover those servers from backup. So
I'm trying to phrase this in terms of false positives and false negatives. You can basically tell me when something is compromised. You cannot absolutely tell me that something is okay. You can just tell me that you can sort things into 2 buckets: compromised and three. Compromised, probably not compromised, and can't tell.
Yes. And you're right. And so anything that we do in terms of recovery, we're still going to say, hey, based on the signatures that either we provided or you provided, we're saying it's not there. Does that mean 100% clean? No. So we'll still do a staged recovery to typically an isolated network before promoting to production.
Which, yeah, I mean, I can act with that. If you give me 3 buckets and say, definitely compromised, probably not compromised, but we can't guarantee it, and we have no way of knowing, I would handle each of those 3 separately.
Yeah.
So, okay, great. Yes.
How can you detect new ransomware from the recovered data within 24 hours?
So one key thing that we look for is not necessarily the ransomware or the malware, because quite frankly, at that point, it's the end of the kill chain, it doesn't matter. They're already in control of that server. That's just what they loaded at the end to encrypt the data and do the damage. So our focus is not on the latest strain or ransomware that the team is using. Our focus is on the same standard set of tools that they all use to establish persistence. And whatever encryptor they load at the end doesn't matter. And even in the case of, for example, encrypting at the hypervisor level, it's usually a Python script anyway. There is no executable to look for. And so we're focusing on persistence and remote access, less on the end of the kill chain.
And we have one more. How fast do you find clean images, and how do you do that? Can you share best practice in finding clean image?
Yeah, so how we do it is we take the indicators of compromise and we do the last backup across every server. We don't do every backup on every server on the first scan, because then you're talking hundreds of thousands of backups. So we just do last night's, then establish, okay, from here, what is probably a compromised server, what probably isn't. And the probably is, then we'll go deep and say, okay, for these 10, we're going to do the last 30. So we're going to do 300 backups. So that's how we do it in a timely manner.
So you use, again, as you were saying before, you use the most probable to determine your next steps.
100%.
Perfectly Bayesian. Fantastic. Any other questions? Folks oh, well, wait. Checo always has a question.
Oh, sorry. He waits till the end.
You're not even a little bit sorry, don't pretend.
So in financial services, you have systems that are very tightly coupled, and you may have systems that are compromised and tightly coupled systems that aren't compromised. How do you deal with the orphaned records or the orphaned areas between those two?
Yeah, so actually, because we typically see the persistence and compromise not on production servers, they're just victims, it's not a common challenge to say, well, this server has data that's a different point in time than this one, because usually you're recovering the entire production server back to the same point. But if you did, then yes, it is a challenge you'd have to address on a per case basis, but it's usually very unlikely. They know you're looking on that production server. They're going to sit on the periphery.
And maybe this is because I'm not a database architect, but wouldn't you already have a policy in place anyway that says when there's a case of conflict, this is what so for each record, if you're looking at something that's coupled at that level, you're basically saying we use which version we use based on what?
Yeah, and one of the things we help customers do is create groupings of those application constructs, so you can make that decision based on what isn't or isn't compromised. Hey, we're going to roll the whole thing back even though we don't need to because we're concerned about the records and consistency between the services.
Yeah, so, okay, I wasn't quite right on the details, but the notion that it's actually something you want to build in policy is where to go.
Very rarely used, but
Yeah. Okay, well, Josh, thank you very much. Again, a round of applause for Josh, please.
Thank you.